The main logic was that this object is an alien object that has its own physical properties and it's not subject to the physical properties of the Earth, like it has its own reflection, or maybe it's not a reflection but representation of another world or something. I don't know. But the most common question that I received was about this object, and people mostly were interested in the reflection inside this one. How do I put the sky inside this object? So, this final artwork in KRITA, but let's return to the blend and look at how it was created. And the first that we can see, I don't have the same reflection inside Blender scene as in the final art, and this is some tricks that I used and I'll show you here. So I just add a UV sphere in Blender and let's increase the density of this mesh. I used 128 for segments and 96 for rings. It creates a pretty dense grid. I need this because I'm going to scale this object to a large object and also scale it by z-axis. I need an enormous size of this object. Some kind of like this. Yeah, I guess it's okay. Apply scale and let's open the shade editor here. Enable preview render and add a new material to this object. So I start with black color. And let's start with these cracks inside this object. To do such an effect, I have some texture of cracks. As I remember, I used this one. And this texture creates this pattern on the object. We just need to add mapping to this texture to find some interesting position of this texture on the object. Maybe some kind of like this. Now we can use this texture first for normal map to add a little bump on the object. Bump node, connect to height, and I think I add a color ramp just to control this texture. We can see that cracks appeared on the object, and the second I want to use the same texture as a roughness. I duplicate this color ramp and connect it to roughness. So it looks some kind of like this. Also, I used sheen to add such effect, which used to add reflection to materials that have microsurface details such as clothes or dust, but also such as dielectric or metallic shader setup. Maybe I decrease the specular a little bit and increase the metallic to make the surface like metal. So yeah, good. This is the first part of the material, and for the second one I add another principal BSDF. Add mix shader, and for the mask to mix these two materials I'm going to use the same texture here. I think I duplicate this color ramp and use this one for that. Yeah, we need to invert this map and I can use this color ramp to control this mask. I want to use this material as an emission, but instead of using simple color and get a boring light effect, I suggest using such an image. This is a colorized image of space, and I guess it's pretty well fit for this concept. Connect this one to emission. So this one will be shining through these gaps in the object, creating such a colorized light effect. But let's add RGB curves to change a little bit this color. So I want this light will be closer to red and maybe orange colors. To do this, I just go to blue curve and pull it down. It reduces the blue tone from the image, and the same for green. And for the red, I pull the red curve up to add more reddish tones to this image. And again, we can find some interesting position of the image using mapping. By the way, you can animate these parameters if you are doing some animation, for instance. And that's all for the material, because by adding the sky reflection we will use another trick. How we can add sky in the Blender? Of course, the traditional way is to add HDRI as an environment texture and some kind of like this cloudy HDRI, and we may see this sky being reflected in our object. But it's not the same as here. Some disappearing reflection on the border of the shape and also on the ground part. Even if I increase the power of this light, it won't have the same effect. So I used another way. I add another sphere to the scene, scale the sphere to cover the whole object with the sphere. We can also go to viewport display and make the sphere display as bounds to hide the sphere in the viewport. Alright, add a new material to this one and we can use some sky image in this material. Also using this image as an emission. Yeah, we can see the sky in the viewport on the sphere works well, but we can also move this image on the surface using mapping to find the necessary position of this image so that it will reflect it in the right place. Anyway, now we see the sphere in the camera, but we need to see our main object instead, with reflection from this sphere. It's absolutely simple to do. Essentially, everything that I have to do is go into visibility and uncheck camera. In this case, we will hide this object from the render in the camera. Now we can see our main object and already don't see the sky sphere. Also, I used light linking to link this sky sphere and the object. In this case, this light will be affected only for the main object. So I increase emission strings and we can see that this sky is reflected in the object and it also creates such parallax effect. But now the sky reflected on the whole surface. If we look at the final art one more time, we still can see that this reflection is affected only some part of the surface, while the other part almost is dark. So, I again select the sphere and make it visible in the viewport, since I have to see this texture. As you may understand, I need a mask to select this part of the texture that already will be affected this reflection. To do this, I add gradient texture in the shade editor and change it to spherical. Of course, add mapping and let's make this texture visible in the viewport. And let's scale it using mapping that it will be like a spot. It's going to be a mask. Also, we can add the color ramp with B-spline. First of all, to have more control, and second, to make this mask much softer. Alright, I connected principal BSDF with emission and I need mix color node. Connect this sky to the B slot, created mask to the factor and change this color A to black. And we select the part of the sky using a gradient mask. If I disable the sphere from the camera, we can see how it works as a reflection. Now we can return to the mapping settings and try to scale it so that it covers the front part of the object. Some kind of like this. And see the difference if I disable this mask, it covers the whole object, and enable this mask, we can cut off this reflection and it works only on one side. One spot, which I need for my artwork. Essentially, we need all this manipulation just only for one reason, to render this object separately from the environment scene. But before we go into render, let's make an environment scene. I maybe hide this guy for now, and let's add some landscape. I'm going to use the free landscape add-on for Blender. And I need some large terrain here. Good. And scale it to an enormous size. Also scale it by z-axis to make this ground flatter. I guess I also add a plane. It's going to be a water surface. Water. And this one is ground. Good. And move this water a little bit under this ground surface. Alright, I hide this one and we need light. I think I do append and get the same HDRI that I used in my original scene to save some time for searching for this HDRI in the Blender kit. So in the world shader I need environment texture and this is my HDRI, if I did this correctly. Yeah, it looks like that. Let's add the materials quickly. Water and add a new material, reflection, some kind of like this. Select ground and also add a new material. Or maybe let's use the same materials that I already have in my original Blender scene. If you need more explanation about this, how to make grounds and materials, I leave links to my videos here in the corner of this video and also in the description. I don't think it's necessary to explain the same one more time. Alright, as I said, I want to make renders separately. If I unhide all this collection with the main object, we can see that everything looks bad. This sphere, which I used for the reflection, now intersects with the ground, and everything looks bad at all. Even if I go to the object settings and disable glossy for this sphere, it fixes this problem, but I lose reflection in the main object. So, in such project I usually separate the scene into parts, make a render and combine everything into one image. I can use two different scenes in one Blender file. So I name this scene as a scene environment, for example. Make a full copy of this one. It creates an absolutely copy of this first scene. Name it like sphere. I guess it's okay. So why do we need that? I open this scene and I disable here this sphere, which I need just for the reflection, but I don't need this sphere for the rendering this environment scene. Here I will ignore this one. Open this scene with a sphere and here I do vice versa. I disable the whole collection with environment, leave only this object and this sphere. Good. And the main trick of using different scenes is that I can use different settings for rendering and wall light settings. I can remove this HDRI from the scene and what we have. I have this scene with the necessary settings for the main object with reflections and light as I made before. As you may see, it works well. But if I go to the environment scene here, I have only the environment scene with lights. In this way we can separate different parts of one scene and work with them independently, which is much more convenient in such cases as this one, where we need some specific settings for each part of the scene with a different light system, for example, but inside one Blender file. So after all, we can go to render and make a render of each scenes, or we also can use Blender Q add-on, which allows us to automate this rendering process. Here I can just add the current Blender file and all these created scenes will be available for rendering in batch render queue, which is pretty convenient in this case, just press batch render and the Blender Q add-on will do this and save all these files on the disk, saves much time for rendering. And use code cgslav25 or follow the link in the description to get a 25% discount on Blender Q add-on. Alright, after rendering I have two image files. The first one is the whole scene and the second one is only the object which we need to combine with the main scene image. If you prefer working only in Blender, you can use compositing right in the Blender to do this. Essentially, everything that I need to do for this using mix color node, connect this scene image to the first socket and the image of the object to the second one. Press using alpha and we can see that now this one image with this right object and reflections which we created before. If you prefer doing this in Blender only, you may do some color correction here to achieve the final result, but in this case I need a more creative way. I want to paint some details and I'm going to use KRITA for final corrections and overpaint for this concept after Blender. Let me briefly show what I did here. I used an overlay layer to emphasize light part and the highlights in this water, add a vignette to add more depth to this frame. Then I used a second image of this main object to combine this one with the base image. Make a small correction using filter layer and I used curves here. Next step, I added a mask to this layer and using a soft brush I wiped this layer on the borders of the shape. This allows me to paint this object more beautifully, because on the original image plenty of HDRI reflections and I can apply this just by wiping some parts along these edges and hide this original image. It's not going to be so dark like unrealistic scenes, but more picturesque. Not too much. Maybe change the color to white and reduce this effect in some places and change to black to add. That's why I use KRITA here instead of compositing. It's much more convenient to paint than doing the same in compositing with masks. Also, I used another layer to emphasize this light from these gaps, from these cracks, and do the same for the reflections, just small touches to highlight this part. Here I use the same technique to highlight this sunlight and fog. I added fog using some cloud brushes in KRITA, some kind of like this. Select a color from the image, maybe here, and paint this fog. It's rough effect now, but I decrease opacity first of all, and again select a soft brush. Choose the erase tool for this brush and let's wipe this fog to remove some parts of them and implement this fog to the image more precisely. Some kind of like this. Also, I painted some tracks from this fighter. Glow effect, also using a soft brush. And the last one is post-correction. Global color grading using curves. Increase blue a little bit. Green, and finally its noise, film grain. This effects add some cinematic effect to the concept art. After I've done in KRITA, I returned to Blender with this image because of one scene. I love to use lens distortion here. If you may see, this is my final art, which we saw in KRITA, and here I used lens distortion to make such a cinematic effect of the camera lens. So this is a simple way to create interesting concept art using simple tools in Blender and small adjustments in KRITA. Hit the like to this video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel, also my Patreon to get access to exclusive tutorials and other things available on my Patreon. So thank you for watching and see you